Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
And I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin. How are young people forcing world leaders to act on climate change?
Today, we dive into a new Al Jazeera documentary highlighting the social justice movements pushing for reform. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says the world is facing a climate emergency.
And with political will to respond to the problem fading, there's a growing movement of young people fighting to address the inaction.
Earthrise explores the impact these movements are having in a new episode now airing on Al Jazeera.
The Earth is at tipping point.
Scientists are telling us right now that we have just 12 years.
As the world's leaders fail to agree upon a solution, people are taking matters into their own hands.
Let's show them what courage looks like. We're talking about pain that's happening now.
We're trying with this action to get people to understand that it kills people and that it kills people now. It's already killing people.
Earthrise returns with the people's voice on Al Jazeera.
Well, joining us to talk about the film and the movements making a difference, in Doha, Amanda Burrell. She's a documentary filmmaker and the executive producer of Earthrise. In London, Claire Farrell, she's the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, one of the people movements featured in the new Earthrise documentary. And in Boston, Massachusetts, Varshini Prakash. She's the co-founder and executive director of Sunrise Movement, which is also featured in the Earthrise episode. Welcome, everyone, to the stream. Varshini, I want to start with you and a tweet. You take a look at my screen here. You tweeted this not too long ago. One of the best parts was talking to this amazing group of 8th graders after the show who've been learning about climate change and the Green New Deal in class. The second best part was learning that I'm about the same size as them, but we won't focus on that part. You just wrapped a 3 to 4 week tour around the US with Sunrise Movement, and you were talking to people for whom climate change and its effects they're having to deal with them directly in their day-to-day lives. What was that like? What were some of those stories?
That's right. We launched on April 18th in Boston, Massachusetts, and we wound our way all across the Midwest, all the way to the West Coast and down the South and back to DC. We ended just exactly 1 week ago, and it was one of the most life-giving, moving experiences of my entire life. We met people in Iowa, which is an incredibly important state as we move into the presidential elections in the United States, but has been, inundated by climate-fueled floods. The pollution that emanates from corporate agriculture has been horrendous for communities there. We met farmers and indigenous communities all across Iowa. We went to a place called Chico and Paradise, California. Paradise is a place that has been so burnt down to rubble that 19,000 of 20,000 structures no longer exist. We met individuals who's imagined had to get into their cars and flee, going straight into fires that have been ravaging the entire West Coast of America all last fall. And to hear these stories was just harrowing and made us realize that we knew it, but to see and meet these people who understand that climate change is occurring in this instant. It is not 30, 40, 50 years into the future. People are dying right now.
And one of the most striking things, aside from what you just told us, which is pretty striking in itself, laying out those examples there, is the people that you've managed to get involved, to care about this, people who are directly affected. So I want to play a clip from the documentary. Our journalist Laurel Chor traveled to Boston to see how young people are powering an organization, the Sunrise Movement. Have a look.
A lot of people I know that climate change is an issue. That's not the debate. The debate is how willing they are to get involved.
I think a lot of young people don't feel like they have the power at all to make any change. If we actually come together, we totally can change so many things.
I thought I was coming into a meeting, and it's really a lot more than that. There's energy. They're engaged. You feel the sense of urgency. It's not a distant, vague reality for them. This is their future, and you can feel that here.
So Amanda, looking from the outside in as the executive producer of this documentary series, what did you make of Sunrise Movement? What shocked you? What was the most surprising of it for you?
I think the shock is where we are today with the situation facing the planet. It's the extremes that we're facing, as Varshini has very clearly spells out, just from looking at the United States itself. We've never seen them before. But what was particularly inspiring about Sunrise is the wave of young people who are rising to meet the challenge and are not putting up with that, are standing up, making their voices heard, and not only are making a noise about it, but are also putting pressure from within the political system, on the political system, to make sure that politicians, Democrat politicians, come along with them and take up the cause to push for an economy based on renewable energy, which is what we need to move towards. Mm-hmm. So, I think Sunrise movements are a particularly good example of a general sort of wave of energy that's happening at the moment around the world. And the school climate strikes are a particularly good example of young people, 1.4 million people, children, taking to the streets to demand change. And the Sunrise movement was a very good example of that energy, that determination, that passion, and also one which is really making a difference on the political scene. Mm.
And Claire, I know that you're part of the group that is making that difference. I'm just curious. We have a tweet from Magdi Mukhtar outlining kind of one of the challenges, the hurdles, if you will, saying greed is what is stopping us from dealing with this serious issue. We have the knowledge and the technology to harness enough clean, renewable energy and stop the use of fossil fuels altogether. This means the end of petrodollars. And then another tweet I'm going to switch to quickly here, saying governments have the resources to create awareness about climate change. They have the power to enforce climate change mitigation policies, but unfortunately most of them are inept. And they say they're definitely guilty as charged. Now, I know so much of these different movements is about pressuring governments, particularly politicians who might be reluctant, to do what people are doing on the ground all across the world, especially youth. What do you make of that greed, and is that really a hurdle? I mean, where do you get your motivation?
Well, I think the sort of assertion that people are inherently greedy is a massive problem for us right now, and of course the sort of Ayn Rand neoliberal selfishness as a virtue kind of age of our times is extremely problematic, because I think a lot of the problems are not just political, not just science, but also they're cultural problems, right? And we need to realise our collective agency. So hopefully this is something that grassroots movements inherently will naturally do in bringing people together, because we really need to act together. And on the government's not giving the public the information that they deserve. I think in this country, what I've found the most shocking is not just that the government aren't educating the public, but there are many members of our political system who I've encountered who definitely don't really understand the science very well themselves. And that to me is a great problem, that there's no official policy within Westminster that's set up. There's no official space set up to educate politicians on this matter. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, they get some reports, but it's up to them whether or not they actually know the facts, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a big problem, because I've spoken to my
and I think.
Sorry. She talked about zero emissions flying when I complained about the expansion of an airport, so this is what we're dealing with.
Varshini?
And I think one thing that really deserves to be underscored here is that we do have everything that we need except for political will. And there were reports that came out showing the way that we have the technological pathways, we have the technology. It's not going to be some sort of new age technocratic solution that's going to solve all of our problems on this issue. We have, at least in the United States, and I'm the U.S. lags far behind globally, so I'm sure this is true all over the world. We have the public support amongst the majority of Americans, both conservatives and liberals, or however you identify. People want the government to take action on this issue. So to say that it's not is simply false, and what is lacking are the politicians frankly, on both sides of the political aisle in the United States, both people who have taken copious amounts of money and therefore halted progress on the issue as a result from the fossil fuel lobbyists and executives, and also from politicians who have simply lacked the moral courage, the moral vision to step out there and take a risk and say, you know, I'm going to do what's necessary, even if I'm not sure exactly how this will play out the next election cycle.
Which is why groups like yours, Sunrise, and also why groups like Extinction Rebellion, where Claire is a representative of, are literally taking this fight to them, to the lawmakers and legislators. I want to show our audience what that looks like, because the two tactics of the two groups are slightly different. Now, Extinction Rebellions, some might say, are a little bit more disruptive, a little bit more drastic to ensure that their voices are heard. So I want you to have a listen to the training that some members go through.
Can we have an activist who is willing to be arrested and carried off to a police van in the middle? Can. You're willing to get arrested, but you're not going to make it easy for them.
Members are trained to go limp as soon as they are touched.
All right, well, it's pretty clear. We're gonna arrest you now.
So it would take as many as 5 police officers to remove a single activist. By maximising the number of arrests, XR believe they can create publicity and a groundswell of support.
So this is what it looked like in practice. This is what it looks like when it comes to the real thing. You can see this tweet here, Extinction Rebellion Derby. This is a die-in. This was tweeted on May 18th. And you can see people declaring a climate emergency. Contact your counselor to ask them to support that idea. And you see what the die-in actually looks like. But this isn't the only tactic. So I want to share with our audience video of a few more of your tactics. This via Facebook and warning for our guests or our audience members who are a bit squeamish. This might look drastic, so take a look at this. This is Blood of Our Children, live stream 1. And this was an event that happened on Downing Street, not far from the Prime Minister's office in the UK in London. And you can see the fake blood spread across the street there. I'll pause it there, and you see another event that happened in Paris, and this was just about a week ago. Extinction Rebellion France posted this on Facebook. So Claire, talk to us about these tactics, and do they work? What is the reaction that you get from politicians and from average everyday people?
Well, the blood events were, the original one that we set up was called the Blood of Our Children, and the idea was to make a lot of fake blood, which was eco-friendly, by the way. And safe for the children who all put their hands in it on the pavement and stuff, and to try to represent the kind of visceral reality of committing to the deaths of millions of people, which is precisely what politicians are doing when they choose to fail people to act on this topic. I think there are several things going on when you have a kind of a strategy which is based around civil disobedience. The idea is that you are not you are in rebellion, or you are declaring the social contract to be null and void. Therefore, you're entitled as a citizen to peacefully break laws without harming anybody, in order to make your voice heard. And if you're willing to be arrested and lose your liberty, then that arguably gains you a level of sympathy, because people will see how serious you are, basically. So we have a range of activists who are willing to take part in these actions, some willing to be arrested, some willing to face prison sentences. And I know a few people who engaged in disrupting trains who are in a court in front of a jury on Thursday. They've been on quite serious bail conditions for their actions.
Varshini, I want to kind of comment and echo on some of what you talked about. You said there's different groups, you guys have different tactics perhaps, but a lot of people chiming in online saying that this has to be an inclusive movement. And we know that the United Nations has been warning about the link between climate change and global inequality. We have a comment from Adrienne S. McCord saying, we asked if we think, they're connected, and she said, absolutely, they're connected. Too often, those downstream politically and economically bear the brunt of climate abuses. There's a privilege to live where renewable, affordable options exist, not to mention the lack of investment in women and sustainable producers. So many of the comments that we've been receiving, Varshini, is about this very issue, about inequality. I recently made a documentary about climate change in Texas. We went to an area here in America called Hidalgo County, and it's true. You know, the people who are less fortunate, new immigrants, people who are struggling for several reasons, are also suffering more. At least I found that. What have you found, and what do you think this brings to the conversation in terms of constructive solutions?
No, that's exactly right. And I think, I mean, this was so apparent on our tour as well. When we went to Paradise, California, I was talking with one of the young people there who had lost her community. And she was sharing how that the community had been very poor and working class to begin with. And then when disaster struck, many of those people, 6-8 months out from when the fires hit, were lucky to receive trailers to live in. Many people were still homeless or were having to live in hotels, their livelihoods completely ruined. And so you can see how the climate crisis, when it plays out on already existing inequalities, we are currently at the highest levels of inequality we've seen in a century. And that is racialized. It's that inequality exacerbates for people of color and communities that have historically been left out of economic prosperity, both in the United States but globally. And it's a really big problem. And what that means is that we cannot shy away from discussing racial and economic justice as part of the solution. And I think a place where the climate movement has failed in years past is by discussing just remaining so focused on polar bears and parts per million and carbon emissions that we forget that this is about people. And what is exciting to me about the Green New Deal in this moment is I think it is for the first time putting forward a federal vision for America that actually is discussing climate action rooted in racial and economic justice, repairing historic harms, ensuring that water and clean air are universal human rights, and that justice and jobs and climate, protecting all of those things at once, go hand in hand. They don't have to be competing missions.
And that's definitely a valid point. And you know, when we talk about and hearing you outline all those problems and maybe some of the shortcomings in the past and previous strategies, Amanda, I'm curious. You know, we have a lot of comments coming in, also video comments that have been sent to us about where people find optimism, how we can adapt across differences, if you will. So I want you to listen to this, and I'd love to get your thoughts. Take a listen to what Lawrence sent us.
Yes, there's still reasons for optimism, although we are already locked in the disastrous impacts of global heating. The world in 2100 can still be livable if we move the climate emergency narrative to something that focuses on the survival of our species and our communities. This is not just about resiliency or adaptation. This is about mitigation in the first place.
Amanda, we heard him say this is about this is about mitigation. What do you make of his comment there?
I mean, I think there is an inevitable amount of having to adapt and be resilient to the climate change that we're all facing. But there's also, in the face of the greatest disasters, is often when we can, humanity is able to pull on resources of creativity and innovation, and to try to stop the problems at their source. Now, admittedly, we've got a long way to go. But I think this is about finding political and creative and successful business solutions on every level. So mitigation, adaptation, resilience, we've got to work on all fronts if we're going to solve this. And we've got to involve all parties, people from all walks of society, the civilians as well as the politicians and around the world. So yeah, operating on all fronts, totally agree.
Mm-hmm. So I pulled up here one headline. This is from Grist, and they write, "The Sunrise Movement has a plan to force presidential candidates to address climate change." And as part of that plan, though, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's part of that plan. That means tactics like going into offices on the Hill here in the U.S. in Washington and lobbying and talking to representatives about what it is that you want them to do. So I'd like to have our audience take a look at one of those tactics that the Sunrise Movement members use to have young people lobby political leaders on Capitol Hill. Have a listen to what happened when a group of children asked Senator Dianne Feinstein to support the Green New Deal. Have a look.
I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. You come in here and you say it has to be my way or the highway. I don't respond to that. I've gotten elected. I just ran. I was elected by almost 1 million vote plurality. And I know what I'm doing. So, you know, maybe people should listen a little bit.
I hear what you're saying, but we're the people who voted you. You're supposed to listen to us. That's your job. I'm 16. I can't vote.
You didn't vote for me.
Well, I'm voting for
It doesn't matter who the one.
Well, a senator from California did respond. This happened in February. She tweeted this: "I want the children from the Sunrise Movement to know they were heard loud and clear. I have been and remain committed to doing everything I can to enact real, meaningful climate change legislation." Varshini, though, what do you make of the uphill battle, really, that you have ahead of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly ironic that in that moment, what Dianne Feinstein said was, "I've been here for 30 years. I got this." And the reason why those children were there was we are looking at a world that is burning, that is flooding, that is increasing in temperatures that will be unlivable within our lifetimes and incompatible with human civilization as we know it. And yet our politicians have done nothing. So I think now it's the time to turn up the intensity and the heat. We are engaging in everything from civil disobedience to direct confrontation and lobby visits to actually being in front of these politicians every single place that they go, so that the climate crisis and also the solutions that are on the table, commensurate to the scale of the problem, are inescapable, and they have to address them head on as we head into this all-important presidential election.
And Claire pulled up this headline here from The Guardian: "The Extinction Rebellion scorecard, what did it achieve?" And you can scroll down and take a look at their view on what you achieved. But you had local authorities in the UK declare a climate emergency in recent months, as they say here. And you had the Labour Party do so as well. Of course, that is not the government. So what do you make of your road ahead?
Well, you know, we know that we're not operating in a vacuum. So obviously it's the school strikes as well. There's a whole range of reports that have come out. There's David Attenborough's shows. There's the sort of tide turning in the media, which is important. That we've put pressure on there too. I think what we've achieved so far, which is important to appreciate, I think, is this focus on the language and being able to talk properly about the things that we're facing in terms of the level of the threat and the convergence of biodiversity loss and climate change as two things which, of course, they come as part of the same story, but they're not. They weren't previously often reported as like two impending crises that come together. So I think helping people to be able to speak about the truth of the situation has been one thing that we've certainly felt successful in. And when you talk about the local governments, I know there are local authorities in America who've been pressured to make declarations of emergency. Right now in the UK, we have over 100, I think it is, local councils that include cities and local county councils who've declared emergency. The Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Assembly, Ireland now, and then Labour passed a motion which was voted through unanimously in our Parliament, which doesn't mean that there's a bill or any changes in law, but it does mean that the entire of Westminster recognises that we are now in a state of climate and environmental emergency, which is important to push home that this is a biodiversity crisis, an extinction crisis, as well as facing catastrophic climate collapse. So there have been some wins. Of course, none of this has resulted in less carbon emissions, or none of it has rewilded anything. None of it has saved any insects yet. There's a big way to go, right? But it's just the start, and we're at the bottom of a huge mountain, I think.
Right, not yet. The bottom of a huge mountain, but there is still time, a little bit. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this part of the conversation, but I want to make sure you catch the new Earthrise series airing today on Al Jazeera and aljazeera.com. You can see the tweet from them here, AJ Earthrise, and you can head over here for where the documentary will be posted. That's all the time we have for now. Next time we will see you on the show, and until then, we'll see you online. But Ahmed, take us away.
Let's just give a meteorologist who sent us this video comment. His name is Eric. We're actually out of time, unfortunately, as Malika just said, so you'll have to wait till next time, or you can catch Eric's video comment online. We'll tweet that out. Thanks for joining us here at AJ Street.